My family has a special name for my life's work. They call it Eliza's Little Project. It's always said with a condescending smile, the kind you'd give a child showing you a macaroni necklace. To them, the thousands of hours I've poured into designing, illustrating, and writing my fantasy novel are just a cute hobby. It's the thing I do in my spare time before I'm supposed to grow up and get a real job. Just last week, at our weekly family dinner, my older brother, Tom, asked if I was still playing with my imaginary friends on paper. My father then chimed in with his usual suggestion that the local community college had a very practical course on bookkeeping. I just nodded and said I'd think about it, the same way I always do. What I didn't tell them is that Eliza's Little Project had just won the Clarion Prize, one of the most prestigious fantasy writing awards for emerging authors. I didn't mention the six-figure advance from a New York publisher or the fact that the film rights were already being discussed. They think they're coming to my apartment for dinner on Friday to give me another lecture about my future. They have no idea they're actually attending a wake for the person they thought I was. Of course, the mockery wasn't always loud. Most of the time, it was a quiet, constant erosion. It started when I was choosing a college major. I came to the dinner table with a brochure for a prestigious creative writing program, my heart pounding with excitement. My father glanced at it for a moment, then slid a pamphlet for the State University's business school across the table. "I'm investing in your future, Eliza, not your diary," he'd said. And that was the end of the discussion. My brother Tom, who had a C average and no discernible passion for anything, had his entire business degree paid for without question. They threw him a lavish graduation party. When I graduated with a marketing degree I despised and a creative writing minor that felt like a secret affair, they took me out for a quiet dinner and told me I'd finally made a sensible choice. But the moment that truly carved itself into my memory was the intervention. It was about 2 years ago. I was working a soul-crushing 9-to-5 to support my writing, and I was exhausted but happy. They invited me over for dinner, and when I arrived, they were all sitting in the living room with serious expressions. On the coffee table, instead of appetizers, were brochures for paralegal certification and real estate licensing. Tom was the ringleader. He had a spreadsheet printed out. On one side, it showed his annual salary and recent bonus. On the other, it showed the $50 I had earned from a published short story. "See, Eliza," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "This is reality. What you do is a hobby. It's time to join the real world." They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to break me. They saw my dream not as a part of me, but as a flaw that needed to be corrected, a sickness that needed to be cured with a dose of grim reality. I went home that night and almost gave up. I looked at my manuscript, the hundreds of pages I'd poured my soul into, and all I could hear were their voices telling me it was worthless. But then, a different feeling started to burn through the shame. Anger. Cold, clean anger. Every condescending remark, every patronizing smile, every time they called my world a little project, it all became fuel. I stopped telling them about my progress. I stopped mentioning my submissions. My writing became a secret, a silent rebellion conducted in the early hours of the morning. They thought their intervention had worked, that I was finally resigning myself to a sensible life. They had no idea they had just given my story the one thing it was missing, a villain. And I was about to write them a spectacular ending. The manuscript for The Sunderlight Chronicles was sent out on a rainy Tuesday in October. It was an act of desperation and defiance. After 100 rejections from literary agents, the Clarion Prize was my last-ditch effort, a final prayer. Sent into the void. The submission rules were strict, the competition was fierce, and I knew the odds were astronomical. I sealed the envelope, sent it off, and then tried my best to forget about it, bracing myself for one last resounding silence. For 6 months, that's exactly what I got. Life went on. I dragged myself to my marketing job, I paid my bills, and I endured the weekly family dinners where my little project was a recurring joke. I started outlining a new story because even if the world never read the first one, the writing was the only thing that felt real. The call came on a Thursday. I was on my lunch break, eating a sad desk salad, when my phone buzzed with an unknown New York number. I almost ignored it. When I answered, a warm, professional voice on the other end said, "Is this Eliza Mayhew? I'm calling from the Clarion." Foundation. I'm thrilled to inform you that your manuscript has won this year's prize. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. A strange, profound calm washed over me. I leaned my head against the cool glass of my office window and just listened. The world outside my little cubicle seemed to go into slow motion. All the noise, my father's lectures, my brother's taunts, my own gnawing self-doubt, just faded away into nothing. In their place was a single, pure, undeniable truth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't delusional. I was a writer. The prize was the key that unlocked everything. Suddenly, agents who had sent me form rejections were calling, eager to represent me. Within 2 weeks, my new agent had negotiated a 3-book deal with a major publisher. When she told me the final number for the advance, I had to ask her to repeat it. It was more money than I'd ever imagined seeing in my life. And through it all, I said nothing. I went to dinner at my parents' house. I listened to Tom brag about his sales commission. I listened to my dad talk about the importance of a 401k. I just smiled and nodded, a secret supernova of triumph burning inside me. I deposited the first check, I signed the contracts, and I planned a dinner party. My dinner party. In my apartment. The stage was set. They thought they were coming for the same old show, but I had a whole new script for them to read. Of course. The night of the dinner party, my small apartment felt like a theater stage right before the curtain goes up. I'd cooked their favorite meal, set the table with the good plates I never used, and placed a single sealed envelope in the center of the table. The air was thick with a strange energy, my nervous anticipation and their oblivious condescension. They arrived, bearing a cheap bottle of wine and a barrage of backhanded compliments about how cozy my apartment was, a word they always used to mean cramped. We sat down to eat, and the conversation was the usual medley of Tom's latest sales achievements and my father's complaints about the stock market. I let them talk, patiently waiting for the right moment. Finally, during a lull, I cleared my throat. "I'm so glad you all could make it," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I invited you here tonight because I have some news. Some good news about my book." I decided to give them one last chance. I offered them a small, incomplete truth. "It's going to be published." The reaction was immediate, and exactly what I had secretly feared. My father put his fork down and leaned back, a skeptical frown on his face. "Published? By whom? One of those internet companies you have to pay?" "Eliza, I hope you haven't been sinking your savings into some vanity press scam. You have to be practical about these things." He didn't ask about the story. He immediately questioned the financial legitimacy, assuming my success couldn't possibly be real. My mother jumped in, her face a mask of social anxiety. "Oh, a book. That's quaint, dear. Will you be using a pen name? It might be for the best. Something a bit more literary, perhaps?" She wasn't celebrating. She was strategizing how to manage her own potential embarrassment. She was already packaging my life's work into a harmless, quirky anecdote to tell her friends. But it was Tom who delivered the final fatal blow. He let out a short, barking laugh and raised his wine glass in a mock toast. "To Eliza, our little novelist. Seriously, that's great. So you sell a few copies, get this writing bug out of your system, and then we can finally talk about getting you into a real career, right? I'm proud of you for seeing a hobby through to the end." He called my triumph an ending. I looked at their faces one by one. My father, the pragmatist, incapable of seeing value without a price tag. My mother, the socialite, incapable of seeing worth without approval. My brother, the narcissist, incapable of seeing success that didn't look exactly like his own. I had held out a tiny, flickering candle of my success, and in their own unique ways, they had each tried to snuff it out. A cold, liberating calm settled over me. I had given them their chance. The test was over. "Actually," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "there's a little more to the story." And I reached for the envelope on the table. As Tom set his wine glass down, a smug and final punctuation to my life's dream, the universe seemed to hold its breath. I looked at the three of them, my family, sitting at my table, in my home, And I saw them for the first time not as the giants of my childhood, but as they truly were, small, frightened people, terrified of any world that didn't fit into the neat, predictable boxes they had built for themselves. In that moment, something inside me broke. But it wasn't a sad, shattering break. It was a clean, decisive snap, like a bone setting itself correctly after a lifetime of being crooked. The desperate, aching need for their approval, a phantom limb that had plagued me for 30 years, simply vanished. The hurt was gone. The anger was gone. All I felt was a vast, cold, liberating pity. They would never get it. Not because they were cruel necessarily, but because they were blind. And I had spent my entire life trying to describe color to men who could only see in gray. My hand was perfectly steady as I reached for the envelope in the center of the table. The movement was slow, deliberate. It drew their eyes. The self-satisfied smiles on their faces began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The power in the room had shifted, and they could feel it, even if they didn't understand why. "You're right, Tom," I said, and my voice was new. It was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of the pleading undertone it had always carried when I spoke to them. "It is good to get things out of your system." I looked from my brother's confused face to my mother's anxious one, to my father's impatient frown. "And I'm starting tonight. The first thing I'm getting out of my system is the illusion that any of you have a right to judge my life." I picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, not with paper, but with the weight of my unlived life, a life that was about to finally begin. What you think is a quaint little hobby is about to become very, very public. This is the official press release from my publisher. It goes out to the national news wires on Monday morning. I thought you, my family, deserved a sneak preview. Their silence was no longer condescending. It was terrified. I slid the single sheet of paper from the envelope and flattened it on the table. The letterhead was stark and official: Penguin Random House. That alone was enough to make my father squint. I let them absorb it for a moment before I began to read, my voice as calm and neutral as a news anchor's. "For immediate release," I began. "New York, New York. Penguin Random House is thrilled to announce the acquisition of a debut fantasy epic, The Sunderlight Chronicles, by Eliza Mayhew, the winner of this year's prestigious Clarion Prize for Emerging Authors." I paused, looking up at them. The Clarion Prize. For those of you who don't follow literary news, it's one of the most significant awards a new writer in the genre can win. My brother Tom's mouth was slightly open. I continued reading. The 3-book deal was brokered by AG Lit Agency for a sum in the high 6 figures. I said the words 6 figures with deliberate, measured clarity, and watched my father visibly flinch, his lecture about vanity presses dying on his lips. Editor-in-Chief Sarah Jenkins calls the novel a staggering work of imagination and a generational epic from a major new voice in American literature. I glanced at my mother, whose face was a battlefield of confusion and dawning horror. I delivered the next line directly to her. "Eliza Mayhew is poised to become a household name. So much for needing a pen name. I saved the best for last." Film and television rights for the series are already generating significant interest, with preliminary negotiations underway with a major Hollywood studio. I finished reading and placed the press release in the exact center of the table, a white flag on a conquered battlefield. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of my refrigerator. They were all staring at the paper as if it were a bomb. Tom looked pale, his world of spreadsheets and commissions suddenly seeming flimsy and small. My mother was muttering something under her breath, maybe practicing the words, "my daughter," the famous author. My father just stared, speechless, the word practical finally failing him. "So," I said, my voice still quiet. But now it owned the room. "No, Dad, it wasn't a scam. No, Mom, I think I'll stick with my own name. And Tom, this isn't me getting a hobby out of my system. This is me starting the career I built, not just without your support, but in spite of it." I stood up from the table. "This dinner is over, and so is my time as your family project. You will either learn to respect what I do, or you will learn to live without me. The choice is yours." They just sat there, 3 ghosts at a feast, finally silenced by the success they swore could never happen. It's been 2 years since that dinner. My first book, The Sunderlight Chronicles, hit #1 on the bestseller list. The movie adaptation just cast its lead actress. My life is unrecognizable. I no longer work in a gray cubicle. I write full-time from a small house with a real office, a window that looks out onto the ocean, and a quiet that I've earned. My family, of course, did not choose to be cut off. Instead, they chose to become the world's most awkward fans. My mother now begins every social conversation with, as the mother of a best-selling author. My father sends me unsolicited articles on tax shelters for high-income earners. And Tom, my brother Tom, once had the nerve to ask if I could get the movie's director to look at a brilliant screenplay idea he had. I keep them at a polite, firm distance. The poetic justice, I realized, was never about their ruin. It was about their irrelevance. They have to live in a world where my name is on the cover of a book in every airport, where my story is discussed by people they want to impress. They are forced to constantly confront the success they said was impossible. They are haunted by a ghost of their own making. My victory wasn't in their defeat, but in building a world so complete and so joyful, their opinions simply can't find a way in. For anyone out there whose passion has ever been called a little project or a waste of time, please know that your world is real and it is valuable. If you've had to fight for a dream that nobody else understood, I would be honored to hear your story in the comments. We build our own kingdoms, one word, one brush stroke, one note at a time. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe for more stories about proving them all wrong.